Wake up in the morning, I just gotta get it. Wake up in the morning, I just gotta get it.
Hey everyone, welcome to LMS, the Lunch Meeting with Schoology. We are your co-host for lunch. I'm Kellie 80, and I'm joined by my colleague and co-host, Ericka Waterman. And both of us, former educators, totally remember how great it was to connect with other people just during lunchtime, take a little bit of a break. So we're actually going to spend this time to do a little podcast so that you can join us for our lunch break.
Yeah, so overall, our lunch meetings are just going to be chatting about Schoology. Of course, it's our favorite product here at PowerSchool. But we also want to talk about trends that we're seeing and then have friends join us on our LMS podcast to share their own tips, tricks, and trends. So thanks for joining us today. We're excited to start the lunch meeting.
All right, Ericka, came across an article I think you'd find really interesting. I'm just going to start with that today. Yeah.
Well, wait to hear about it.
Because I know you and I talk about assessments a lot, obviously, and
Yeah,
there's so many interesting conversations happening right now around assessments. Some of that AI driven, like I know people are very concerned about cheating and plagiarism and those kinds of things. Although I think, as we've talked about, that's nothing new. Like that's why people ask for lockdown browsers and those kinds of things. But I ran across an article on EdWeek, and it was about the final exam. And the name of the article was like, why the pioneers of high school exams are rolling them back. So apparently, in New York, at least, which, is pretty famous for the Regents exam, they've proposed removing the exit exam altogether from the list of diploma requirements. And it's just interesting about, like, there were, according to the article, there are 25 different states that had like high stakes tests that were part of some kind of evaluation, and it scaled back to like only 13 in 2019. So it's like dropping off. And so it made me wonder, because having been, we're, thinking about end of term, depending on where you are in the school year, there's always a final exam week. One thing I was wondering is like, is it time for us to just say bye-bye to finals? Like, are they really that good of a measure? Like,
I so remember this being a teacher in a classroom. First of all, I hated when I first started teaching having to create the final, because I was always like, what does this actually look like? What did I want to accomplish over the course of the year?
and
Did I actually teach these things?
And do I have time to grade it before I've got to submit my grades?
That was always the big thing. So then it was like, how fast can I like make this on me? So I like check the box, but the kids prove themselves, but yet it's not a huge pain yet. Oh, for sure. And it, I've always wondered, because then it becomes the, I don't know, I always refer to it as like the autopsy, right? Because it's even if the kids look at their final score, which I think most of the time they're doing just to make sure they pass the class, I'm like that, I'm not really giving, it's not for them, it's for me, right? It's to see, did I do what I expected? And then, where did I fall short? And then I usually had 1,000 reasons for why I did. So that's such a good point of like, do you scale it back? And do you, I've also seen where districts are, scaling back the final assessments, but then they're wanting to put district like iterative assessments, throughout the semester. And like, you do get to that, how much testing is too much testing? And yeah, it's just finding that. I feel like the assessment question and conversation has been going on probably as long as public education has. What's right, what's not. What's beneficial, what's not.
Well, and I'm sure you've we used to look at like stuff from Rick Stiggins all the time in terms of like, what was the purpose of the standardized assessment? Like, that was to rank students, like not every assessment was built to like help kids learn. It was to have a ranking system. So yeah.
I remember getting out of college, where I'd been taught like, oh, this is what you need to do. And I was taught how to write multiple choice questions from like a
Oh,
almost this is how you can trick students. I felt like they taught me like how to try and make things difficult. And I was like, is that what I'm now testing your test taking abilities and not your actual knowledge of this, right? So I remember when I got out of college, this is probably dating myself, but when I got out of college and started realizing like depth of knowledge and like the different structures to things. And I was like, oh, I don't want them to just regurgitate the facts to me or things, definitions. I want them to show that they can use it, right? That's what's more appropriate to me. So I think that's kind of catching on in this world of final exams. Like, is it really necessary to have an assessment, or is it something to show they're learning as they're learning?
Like applying it somehow, or
Yeah. Well, and I think we're also getting to the point with technology where, like I saw this interesting thing with Anderson Cooper and this AI tool, and I can't remember which AI tool it was, but where the AI, it was on video, and it was like coaching him on, oh yeah, you did a good job on that. This isn't quite right. And was like helping him as he was drawing on a chalkboard. And I was like, where is this all going? Because we're eventually going to get to a point where we don't need to teach the facts so much. We really have to start teaching like critical thinking and being able to tell like when something is accurate and when it's not, and what's real and what's opinion. And like, we're just kind of moving into like a whole new realm. And so, that notion of a final exam, to your point, it does kind of seem like it's time to say goodbye and think of assessment in a different way.
Yeah. Well, and I guess the reason why this is such an important topic for like our Schoology customers and like everyone who's actually a teacher, but people love course assessments. Like when we would ask people like, what is your favorite feature in Schoology? That is always number one. Course assessments, like people love it. And there's other ones that people love, like, the unsung hero of pages, but like assessments are really popular. And I think part of the reason why they're popular is actually tied to what we were just talking about, which is it's a really flexible thing. And it's kind of, I remember talking with the product team when we decided to do a new version and go beyond test quiz and like have a new type of tool for assessment about what to call it. And there was some conversation about like, should we even call it an assessment? Because that puts people into a mindset of like what it has to be. And it actually is just an activity, right? Like,
yeah. Oh my God. I was so glad you brought that up. Because test quiz, when I first started, was the big like to do. When I first joined the Schoology product team, everybody was like, when's test quiz going away? And I was like, what are we talking about? So just for the listeners, test quiz is not going anywhere. It's staying
I think
for the foreseeable future.
Yes.
Test quiz. Keep using it. You're fine. We'll eventually shift away, but not anytime soon. So I thought the same thing. Like, why do we have this test quiz? Why do we have this thing called course assessment? And especially just because the notion of assessment, I think we try to use that term to be very broad, but unfortunately, I think people just get stuck with their blinders on what they have previously thought of an assessment versus, to your point, something that's much more flexible. Because, you were telling me it's so much more engaging for students that we really could be using it in a lot of different ways in the classroom rather than just as the assessment tool.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think for people that like are really savvy with course assessments, they could probably chime in with all kinds of cool ways they've used it. But I will say that I think we take for granted that somebody who, uses Schoology is going to know all the bells and whistles and all the different ways you actually could think about it. And I think it's always good to just remind people that like, it's really just capturing evidence, and you just have to think about what evidence you want to capture. And I feel like that's even more important now because we do have AI and we do have things that, what is more important for us to gauge if students remember a fact that they could look up, or that they are able to apply that in a way and demonstrate that in a performance-based task or something that they could do. So like I remember when we first released audio, video, or file uploads into course assessments, people were like, whoa, that's so cool, because then I don't have to rely on a kid typing something, or it doesn't have to be constructed. It can be constructed response versus selected response. And I mean, let's be
Yes.
honest, like we have how many question types inside of Schoology? It's like 18 tech enhanced question types.
So many. I was looking at that the other day. There's so many options.
And most of them are just multiple
Mhm.
choice with a different flavor of what it, I mean, there's a lot that's just selected response, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but there's so many more things you could do with it. So, another thing that I have seen teachers do, and this is maybe more true in elementary, but really thinking about it as a way you could almost do a self-paced lesson. Like each item is its own little thing, because you can upload video and you can have just a text box, so just text items. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
That's really cool. Well, as you were talking and thinking of like, you said entering the audio visual piece, my biggest problem with doing constructive response, I taught English, as I believe you did. And it was always grading the writing, which is super important, but it always took so much time that when it came to doing any kind of assessment, I was like, how can I make this faster for myself so that I don't have to add this on top of the essays and the other things that I'm grading? And so, but I also think it would have been so much more entertaining and a way to avoid cheating if I made the response, okay, here's the constructive response that I'm looking for, but I want you to do it on video. And then I can make sure it's obviously your words. You can tell if somebody's reading things, right? Your students, you can tell when they're being them and when they're not. And the other thing I think that would be so beneficial about kind of using this assessment a different way is, I hated having to give up days in my class to give assessments, because I was like, my time with students is so valuable. Where you do this, like you mentioned, have this interactive lesson piece. I can assess them by having them do this video response back to me, and way more entertaining to grade. Let me tell you, I scroll through TikTok like you wouldn't believe. I could handle watching videos of my kids and scoring them on that. So super interesting to think about it in, hey, let's not just use this as a, creative multiple choice tool test, but rather how can we use this in lessons and still use it to evaluate students' learning, but do it in a way that's so much more creative, both for the student and the teacher.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned that about the kind of the grading part of it too, because I'm going to totally age myself here, but I taught in the International Baccalaureate program, and so they've got a really healthy perspective, I think, on assessments, because there's multiple ones. When I taught HL English, so there was 4 different assessment things that happened, and they were all different. So one was testing a certain kind of skill, like your ability to read something on the fly and then do a written commentary on it. And this one is like, this is one that's more of like a comparative essay, and this is the World Lit paper that you have time to it was very like well-rounded. But feedback on those, it took me forever, because you'd write all this and then I would notice kids would just go to the, they just want to see what the grade was. Like, what was my grade? Not like, what was the feedback? So I started recording on audio tapes. I'd go to the language lab, if you remember the language lab, and I would record on audio tapes my feedback, and then I'd take kids to the language lab and they would have to listen to my feedback before I would give them their grade. And so in course assessments, the fact that you can give verbal, like you can actually give audio feedback, is actually pretty amazing. Like I would have used that like crazy. And after a while, kids couldn't find audio tapes anymore. Like, what are these so-called audio tapes? Like, I think my dad's car has something for those, but I don't know where to buy those anymore. So anyway, I think we also could be like really thoughtful around how we do give feedback also. And it was faster. It was so much faster for me and so much more personal for me to like give feedback verbally
Well, because the thing I struggled with when writing feedback was making sure that my tone was coming across appropriately. Like I would agonize over like exclamation points versus period.
Yeah,
Like I want to let you know that I'm trying to say this in a very positive way
yeah,
and
yeah.
don't want you to read it where if you hear my voice saying it, to your point, not only faster, but also I don't have to think about my words as carefully because
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
going to hear the inflection in what I'm saying. Yeah, there's just the other perk that I was thinking about with the course assessments, which yeah, to your point, we probably need to rename because everybody we're trying to get you to think beyond just, the
Yeah.
regular assessments you might have used. But you also mentioned like the ability to submit on behalf of the student.
Yeah, yeah.
And that has been brought up so many times with Schoology of just so many scenarios of students who either need help submitting or like probably my older son who would have forgotten to actually submit the thing that he did, but being able to go in and do that, I think that's a nice little, like a little added bonus, if you
Oh
will,
yeah,
for this,
yeah.
this part.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that especially and we talked about this for elementary where sometimes they drew something like, and they're not going to know how to like get that in, but like, so you can just use it as a capturing mechanism, they showed evidence of learning here and here's a picture of it. And I don't know. I think the other thing, speaking of pictures, I think a lot of people don't dive into like all the things they can actually do with the question stem. So, there's a lot you can add in there. You can add a video, clip, you can actually add audio, you can give kids access to a calculator only on this assignment or on this question type rather. So I think there's just ways to be creative, but I think the more visually appealing it is, the more engaging it is. And I think course assessments has a unique way to be super visually, and it takes some time, but you can reuse those questions. So like once you build it, not that you shouldn't ever redo it or rethink it, update it, but
No, but when you find that sweet spot of like, oh my gosh, I just created something that is fantastic and I want to make sure that I reuse it. Like that's such a good point.
Yeah.
To be able to reuse that year after year when you do have it to a good spot, even if it's for 2 years is beneficial, which is nice.
So I do think like with AI, who knows what will change with the way we think about assessments moving forward. But I do think if we can think outside the box and think about how kids can demonstrate understanding different ways and leverage it for that. And maybe, I don't know. I mean, I would be very curious to hear people's take on, is the final dead? Are final exams dead? Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, for sure we want people who are, if you're a Schoology user, make sure you go to course assessments, make sure you like poke around. Cause you were pointing out to me that like the tools in that rich text editor, like there's a lot of options, right?
Yeah.
And so we buried the lead is what we did. We're like, hey, did you know that this really cool thing is up here? So, make sure that you're exploring because I wonder how many hidden features, not hidden, but like features that I just didn't even realize were available in course assessment until you start getting in there and kind of playing around. And to your point, thinking a little bit differently. Like you mentioned, we were talking earlier how important it is for students to do self-reflections, to be able to score themselves or the self-assessment and the ability to do that through course assessments where you could see how they rank themselves and why they think that.
My favorite question type to use for that is actually the chart, because it was super easy to set up, like, because usually I was grading on a rubric. So maybe it worked well for me because I was teaching English, but it was like, here's the 4 things that are on the rubric. On the 1 to 5 scale, what did you put yourself as? Because they could drag the bar up to whoever they wanted. And it wasn't really a grade. It was something I had to grade. It was just an easy way for me to get their feedback and then also let them know, like, well, I actually agree with you, or I think you're being too hard on yourself for some of these areas. So
and I also found that's a really clever use of that. And I also found when you ask students to do that before they submit, sometimes they'll be like, oh shoot, I don't think I actually did that thing that I'm going to be graded on. Let me go back and add that or improve on it before I actually submit this. So you actually truly get, that was a big thing that I was tried to be really conscious of in my later years of teaching, which was making sure that I was very clear on my expectations, because I always found that students would rise to my expectations as long as I was honest with them up front, and gave examples of what I was looking for, which is another option that you could do for course assessments, is provide that content without the question, just to get them going before they answer.
And I think the big fear about, well, we were talking about this earlier, the big fear about AI and cheating and all that stuff, I think it's going to cause us hopefully to think differently about how we do want to measure learning, and like what is the best measure, we were talking about the best evidence of that learning. And I think it's pretty flexible with course assessments to really do that, and not focus so much on what we might think of as traditionally the assessment items or the question types that we typically use. Because I think our fear isn't that kids are getting lazier, although I'm sure that's some of it, but it's mostly, if I have to help the student, I have to know what they're thinking. And if it's AI doing their thinking, I can't really gauge if they got it. So yeah. Interesting.
Well, it is. And I'm sure we're still going to be talking about assessments and what the best practice years from now also.
Yeah.
Evidence. Yeah, thank you. But if nothing else, hopefully you guys get in and explore, what's possible with the assessments in Schoology, because there really are a lot of different ways to think about it versus what traditionally has been done. But to your point, we do want to hear back from everybody. We want to know like how you're feeling about final assessments. So don't forget that QR code, that should be on the image. If you're listening to us on YouTube, make sure you scan that and take our poll. Definitely interested in getting that feedback from our listeners.
And if you're not, and you don't have the QR code, remember this is all on the Schoology users toolkit. And so you can get to it there as well. So
which has a ton of resources. Highly recommend you just get used to going there frequently.
All right, Ericka, fun as always.
It was. Thanks for such a good conversation.